Blank page, no time restrictions, no one telling you what to write about, total freedom. Recipe for disaster. Today we want to talk to you about how to find a vehicle, and we'll tell you what that means in a bit, that you can use to really explore the topic of your documentary. About 2 years ago, we were hired to come up with a video idea for the YouTube channel Yes Theory in collaboration with Google. And our job was to figure out a way to tell Amar's life story. Amar is one of the guys who run the channel, in a way that would match with the brand of Google. And so because we were working with Google and it was a brand collaboration, there was kind of an obvious way to tell that story, which was specifically through the use of Google searches, because that was the division of Google that we were working with. So the kind of first layer of the vehicle to explore this topic was, hey, why don't we find a way to tell this story through a series of Google searches? We took that a step further by going, okay, well, Google searches obviously take place on a computer, on a screen. So what if we told the whole film on screen? Everything in this story, everything in this world has to somehow be something that would fit on screen. We can't suddenly cut to an interview. We can't suddenly cut to B-roll. We have to figure out a way to show the emotion and the story on screen. We took that a step further, actually.
Now we're getting juicy.
The thing about vehicles is the further you can go with them, the more original your story can become, because a lot of people have made films about sustainability, or a lot of people have made stories about someone's life. There's a million ways to tell the story, but when you get super specific with how you're going to tell that story, suddenly you get to be extremely creative. And a lot of people would think that the more freedom you have, the more creative you can be. But if you've ever been in the position of sitting with a blank page with no limitations, you know how overwhelming that can be. And so by narrowing it down and saying, we're telling this story, which could be done in a lot of different ways, through this lens and this lens and this lens, now all of a sudden you've got a very, very exciting and original idea that you can actually begin working. So the next step we took was, okay, so it's on screen. What if we also didn't allow ourselves the option of using narration? What if all the audio as well as the video also kind of had to originate from the screen? So if we ever wanted someone to talk, it had to be a voice memo that gets played, or we want to show some B-roll from some part of his life, well, it has to be integrated into a YouTube player. Things like that. The video we made, we're incredibly proud of, because the responses that it got were feelings of, this was so nostalgic to watch, or I could picture myself sitting in front of a computer and kind of living those moments in my own life, even though I wasn't there for those specific events that happened to Amar. I can kind of place myself in the scene, and we kind of created that space by really thinking about, well, what's the best way to tell the story?
One thing Amar said is that he felt a little bit like he didn't belong in his town, in his society, and he wanted to get out of where he was from. He always felt like he was a bit of the odd man out. And you could have had that in a VO, Amar literally going, when I grew up, I just didn't feel like I really belonged to blah, 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 blah. Well, we had to then figure out, which gave us that creativity, is how do we get that across without him saying that? What's something that could happen on the computer that could get that same emotion across without anybody saying it? And what we came up with is that when he types his name into Google Docs for the first time, it underlines it red, his name. So
as misspelled.
It's misspelled. They don't know that name. It's a small indication, and it's so much more beautiful that way, that we're able to show how he's feeling and how that was experienced to him as a kid, rather than having him saying it. It's always more powerful to show something than to say it. Another example of this, which is that essentially creativity comes out of limitations, which I think is a bit of a paradox. We think, oh, the freer I am to do something, the more creative I'll be able to be. When in fact, a lot of times it's actually the limitation of your options that forces you to be more creative, right? To come up with those ideas that nobody's come up with because other people haven't put those same limitations on themselves. And I think a good analogy for that is, for me, for example, during the week, I have a million ideas of what to do during the weekend because I'm rubbing up against the limitation of I have to work during the day, I have responsibilities during the week, all these things. That's forcing me to be creative and finding ways of like, oh man, it'd be nice if I could do this right now. Then when the weekend comes and I don't have that same friction, that same I'm being pressed up against something and forced to be creative, I suddenly go, I don't know what the I want to do today.
Yeah.
I know I said 80 things during the week that I wanted to do, and suddenly someone goes, what do you want to do? And I go,
There's too many
I need
options.
a second here. Yeah.
Suddenly you have to make a decision, and that's the
Exactly.
part that's difficult. So if you have a limitation, it forces you to have to make decisions to move the story forward.
Exactly.
Another example is a painter needs a canvas to be able to make a painting on. And a canvas could be a wall in a city.
Yeah.
A canvas could be a city. There needs to be some kind of restriction in order for the thing we're creating, the piece of art, to actually exist. Because if there's no restrictions, it's not really anything. So here are 3 things that you can do to try and identify a vehicle that you can explore your documentary through, or a lens that you can explore your documentary through. The first thing is, what are some things that you're incredibly passionate about that have absolutely nothing to do with your documentary? Is there a way that you can tie those two together? You'd be surprised. There's a lot of ways that you can do that. Another way is to think about a goal that you have for the year. Is there something that you're hoping to achieve, or somewhere you're hoping to go, or someone you're hoping to meet, or a kind of experience you're hoping to have this year? And is there a way that you could try and weave that experience into the documentary and explore it? We've been working with someone who has an idea of talking about sustainability, and the vehicle they're going to use to do that is a goal that they have, which had nothing to do with the film, which is to run across the UK. And that's something that they're going to use to explore the topic of sustainability by making it an entirely sustainable run, so that everything has to be powered through solar energy, and they can't produce any trash while they're doing it. And the people they're going to interview along the way are going to have to meet the character of the story to be interviewed on the road while this guy is running. So there's all these exciting, interesting ways that this topic is now going to get explored that hasn't been done before, because they were able to connect a goal that they had outside of the film with their topic.
What are you uniquely, highly skilled / talented in? How can you use your individual strength to explore the topic like no one else? So this one is about looking into yourself and finding those things that you're particularly good at. Or you could also think about it as, what are my weaknesses that I could actually lean into that could actually become strengths? Am I kind of an awkward person who, shouldn't really be in front of camera? Well, I bet you there's a lot of people who can relate to that. So it's not necessarily about like, I have this skill of solving a Rubik's Cube, although that might be something, but what's something that makes you uniquely you? And get away from the film for a second. Don't go, but that's not a documentary. Yes, I'm good at this, but that's not really enough for a documentary. It genuinely might be that if you pair that weird skill or whatever you are good at with something that you're extremely passionate with a goal that you have for this next year, we found that this trifecta, bringing those 3 things together, creates a really compelling story.
Creates a really exciting idea, and the bonus is that it'll probably also make you even more excited about telling that story, because now all of a sudden things in your life that are outside of the documentary are also going to be worked on, so you can get some extra motivation to be moving forward on that story. So to show you just how far you can actually take this concept, we challenge you to come up with 2 things that you don't think that we can connect in the comments below. If there are 2 things that you don't think fit together, we'll show you there's a way to pair pretty much anything together to make something compelling.
Just as an example, if you pair chess with anything, chess is a metaphor for strategy. Chess is a metaphor for a billion things. And I'm making a documentary about saving the oceans. Well, there's a million connections I can already make. So that's the idea. Just pair 2 things together and see what connections you can start to make. Reply to other people's comments if you can make connections on theirs. And we're going to go through as well and pick a couple and come up with some cool concepts.
Yeah.
And as always,
Burn your boats.